Hello, travelers, and welcome to the Sleepyhead Geographer. I'm so glad you've joined me tonight for another peaceful journey. Close your eyes and let your breathing slow as we travel together to one of Earth's most remarkable places. Tonight, we're visiting Yellowstone, a land where the planet's heart beats strongest, where ancient fires still warm the ground beneath our feet, and where nature tells stories that span millions of years. Imagine, if you will, standing at the edge of a vast wilderness in the heart of the American West. The air is crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine trees and something else, something mysterious and primordial. It's the faint smell of sulfur drifting on the breeze from hot springs hidden among the trees. This is Yellowstone, America's first national park, and tonight we'll discover why it truly deserves to be called America's Hot Heart. Stretching across nearly 2.5 million acres, Yellowstone spans the corners of 3 states: Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. But these modern boundaries mean nothing to the forces that shaped this land. Yellowstone exists on a scale that dwarfs human time, operating by rhythms measured not in years or decades, but in millennia and eons. Tonight, we'll journey through deep time together. We'll witness the birth of mountains and the fury of volcanoes. We'll watch as life returns to devastated landscapes, painting them green again with patient persistence. We'll walk alongside the first peoples who called this land home, and we'll discover how countless generations of animals have found shelter, food, and sanctuary in these valleys and forests. But what makes Yellowstone truly special isn't just its geysers or its wildlife, magnificent as they are. It's the story this place tells, a story of destruction and renewal, of forces so powerful they can reshape continents, and of life so resilient it can flourish even in the aftermath of global catastrophe. Beneath your feet, if you were standing in Yellowstone right now, lies one of the most powerful geological features on Earth. Scientists call it a supervolcano, but that clinical term barely captures the awesome reality. Deep underground, perhaps 30 miles down, sits a chamber of partially molten rock larger than most cities. This magma chamber feeds the hot springs and geysers that make Yellowstone famous, but it represents something far more significant. It's connected to a column of hot rock that extends all the way down to the boundary between Earth's core and mantle, nearly 2,000 miles below. The Yellowstone we know today sits atop a vast caldera, a collapsed crater formed by ancient volcanic eruptions so massive they dwarf anything in recorded human history. But this caldera isn't a scar from some distant past. It's a living, breathing feature of our planet, gently rising and falling as the magma chamber beneath it swells and contracts with Earth's deep rhythms. As we begin our journey tonight, picture yourself standing in the center of this great caldera on a clear summer evening. The sun is setting behind the mountains that rim the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The air is absolutely still, and in that stillness you can hear the whisper of steam rising from hot springs, the distant bugle of an elk, and something else, a deep, almost inaudible humming that seems to come from the earth itself. That humming is the sound of our planet's heartbeat, and Yellowstone is one of the few places on Earth where you can actually hear it. It's the sound of hot rock moving far below, of water heated by that ancient fire finding its way to the surface, of a geological system so vast and complex that it influences weather patterns across North America. Tonight, we'll discover how this heart began to beat. We'll learn about seas that covered this land long before the first mountains rose, about the collision of continents that lifted the Rockies skyward, and about the mysterious hotspot that punched through the Earth's crust to create the Yellowstone we know today. We'll witness 3 great eruptions that reshaped not just the landscape, but the entire planet's climate. We'll see how life, in its infinite creativity, found ways to not just survive, but thrive in this land of fire and ice. And we'll meet the peoples and animals who have called this extraordinary place home. But more than anything, we'll discover how Yellowstone teaches us about time, deep time, geological time, the kind of time that makes our daily concerns seem small and our planet seem infinitely precious. In Yellowstone, you can touch rocks that are older than complex life on Earth, and you can feel the warmth of fires that have burned continuously for millions of years. So let yourself relax completely now. Let the tensions of the day drift away like steam from a hot spring. We're about to embark on a journey through 4 billion years of Earth history, and every step of that journey has led to this moment, to this place, to this story we're sharing together. The heart of America beats strongest in Yellowstone, and tonight we'll listen to that ancient rhythm and let it carry us gently through one of the most remarkable stories our planet has to tell. Let's begin our journey in the deepest past, in a time so ancient that the very continents were shaped differently. Close your eyes and let your imagination carry you back through millions of years, to a world that would be utterly alien to us today. Between 542 and 66 million years ago, long before the supervolcano became part of Yellowstone's geologic story, the area was covered by inland seas. Picture this, where we now see snow-capped mountains and rolling forests, warm, shallow seas stretched to every horizon. These weren't the cold, deep oceans we know today, but tropical waters teeming with life forms that would seem fantastic to our modern eyes. In these ancient seas, the first chapters of Yellowstone's story were being written, not in fire and eruption, but in the patient accumulation of countless tiny shells, the slow settling of mineral-rich sediments, and the gradual compression of organic matter into the limestone and sandstone layers that still form the foundation of the region today. Imagine floating in these prehistoric waters on a calm day 400 million years ago. The water is crystal clear and surprisingly warm. Beneath you, the seafloor stretches away into blue-green depths where strange creatures scuttle and swim. These are the ancestors of modern sea life, but they look like something from an alien world. Trilobites, those armor-plated sea-dwellers with their compound eyes and segmented bodies, crawl along the bottom searching for food. Ancient corals, very different from their tropical descendants, build sprawling reefs that provide shelter for countless other species. The water itself tells a story. Rich with dissolved minerals leached from distant mountains, it carries the chemical signatures of entire continents. As these minerals precipitate out of solution, they fall like microscopic snow to the ocean floor, where they accumulate grain by grain, layer by layer, century by century. This process, so slow as to be nearly imperceptible, was nevertheless building the very foundation of modern Yellowstone. Each layer of sediment represented not just time, but environmental conditions, the temperature of the water, the chemistry of ancient atmospheres, the rise and fall of sea levels as ice ages came and went. Consider the patience of this process. A single limestone formation that you might drive past today without a second glance represents millions of years of accumulated marine life. Every fragment of that rock was once part of a living creature, a shell, a coral skeleton, a microscopic organism that floated in those ancient seas. Their lives were brief, but their remains became part of something eternal. As eons passed, these inland seas began to change. The Earth's crust, driven by forces we're only beginning to understand, started to move and buckle. Continents drifted like massive ships across the globe, occasionally colliding with impacts that raised mountain ranges and drained seas. The first hints of the mountains that would one day surround Yellowstone began to appear during this time. Far to the west, oceanic plates were sliding beneath the North American continent, creating the first uplifts that would eventually become the Rocky Mountain system. But the mountain-building process was gradual beyond human comprehension. Peaks rising perhaps an inch per year, valleys carving themselves grain by grain. As the land slowly rose, the seas began to retreat. But this wasn't a simple draining process. The seas advanced and retreated multiple times over millions of years, each cycle leaving its signature in the rock record. Layers of marine limestone would be topped by terrestrial sandstones, which in turn would be covered by marine deposits as the seas returned. During the periods when land emerged from the waves, a different kind of story began. The first primitive plants started to colonize the newly exposed shores. These weren't the complex forests we associate with Yellowstone today, but simple organisms barely recognizable as plants, moss-like creatures that could survive in the harsh conditions where sea met land. The climate during these ancient times was radically different from anything we experience today. There were no polar ice caps, and the entire planet enjoyed a greenhouse climate. Even areas that are now cold and dry were warm and humid. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels were many times higher than today, creating a greenhouse effect that kept global temperatures elevated. In this warm world, life began to experiment with new forms and strategies. In the seas, the first fish evolved, joining the ranks of trilobites and ancient corals. On the newly exposed land, plants began to develop roots, stems, and eventually leaves, slowly transforming barren rock into something resembling modern soil. But perhaps the most important development during this era was the establishment of what geologists call the basement rocks of the Yellowstone region. These are the ancient metamorphic and igneous rocks that form the deepest, most stable foundation of the area. Formed under conditions of extreme heat and pressure as continents collided and mountain ranges rose, these basement rocks would provide the stable platform upon which all of Yellowstone's later geological drama would unfold. The formation of these basement rocks involved processes of almost unimaginable violence. When continents collide, the impact isn't sudden like a car crash. It's a slow-motion catastrophe that unfolds over millions of years. The leading edges of continents crumple and fold, creating mountain ranges thousands of miles long. The immense pressure and heat generated by these collisions transforms ordinary sedimentary rocks into metamorphic rocks. Limestone becomes marble, sandstone becomes quartzite, and shale transforms into slate or schist. Deep beneath these collision zones, temperatures and pressures become so extreme that rocks actually melt, forming new igneous rocks as they cool. These igneous intrusions, some of them larger than entire states, cooled slowly over millions of years, forming the granite and gneiss complexes that still anchor the Rocky Mountain system today. As the seas finally retreated for the last time from what would become Yellowstone, they left behind a landscape that was dramatically different from the flat, featureless seafloor that had existed before. Mountain ranges now divided the region, creating rain shadows and varied microclimates. Rivers carved valleys through the uplifted terrain, exposing the layered history of those ancient seas in canyon walls and road cuts. The retreating seas also left behind something else: vast deposits of fossil fuels. The organic matter that had accumulated on those ancient seafloors, compressed and heated over millions of years, was slowly transforming into oil, natural gas, and coal. These deposits, scattered throughout the Rocky Mountain region, would one day fuel human civilization's expansion into this remote wilderness. But for now, in those final moments before the age of inland seas ended, the stage was set for the next great chapter in Yellowstone's story. The foundations were in place, layers of sedimentary rock rich in marine fossils, basement rocks that could withstand enormous stresses, and a landscape beginning to show the diversity of elevations and exposures that would characterize the region for millions of years to come. As the last of these ancient seas drained away, perhaps 66 million years ago, they left behind a world primed for transformation. The great mountain-building episodes were just beginning. Climate was starting its long, slow shift toward the conditions we know today. And deep beneath the newly exposed landscape, forces were stirring that would eventually give birth to one of the most remarkable geological features on Earth, the Yellowstone hotspot. The age of seas was ending, but the age of fire was about to begin. And in that transition from water to flame, from patient sedimentation to violent eruption, we can see the fundamental truth about our planet. It is never still, never finished, always in the process of becoming something new. Now let's journey deeper, both in time and into the Earth itself, to discover one of geology's most fascinating mysteries, the birth of the Yellowstone hotspot. As you settle into deeper relaxation, imagine we're traveling not just across the surface of our planet, but down through its layers, toward a realm of heat and pressure that few humans have ever contemplated. The story of Yellowstone's hotspot begins not in Wyoming, but nearly 2,000 miles beneath our feet, at the boundary between Earth's molten outer core and its rocky mantle. Here, in conditions that would vaporize any earthly material instantly, something remarkable happens. Plumes of superheated rock, heated by the planet's radioactive core, begin their slow journey toward the surface. These mantle plumes are among the most powerful forces in geology, yet they move with glacial patience. A column of hot rock rising from the core mantle boundary might take 50 million years to reach the surface, slowly ascending through the thick, viscous mantle like a bubble of oil rising through honey. But when these plumes finally break through the Earth's crust, they create some of the most spectacular volcanic features our planet has ever seen. The Yellowstone hotspot is one of perhaps 20 such plumes that are currently active on Earth. But what makes it special isn't just its power, it's its persistence. While most volcanoes are temporary features that erupt for a few thousand or million years, before going extinct, hotspot volcanoes can remain active for hundreds of millions of years, fed by that continuous column of hot rock rising from the deep Earth. Picture the North American continent 17 million years ago, during the Miocene epoch. The landscape would be recognizable in some ways. The Rocky Mountains had already risen, and many of the river systems we know today were beginning to form. But there was something missing from the northwestern United States, something that would soon make a dramatic and violent appearance. The first sign of the Yellowstone hotspot wasn't in Yellowstone at all, but far to the southwest, in what is now Nevada and Oregon. Here, around 17 million years ago, massive volcanic eruptions began to reshape the landscape. These weren't the relatively small eruptions we see at places like Mount St. Helens, or Mount Vesuvius. These were flood basalts, eruptions so massive they could cover thousands of square miles in molten rock. The Columbia River flood basalts, as geologists now call them, represent some of the largest volcanic eruptions in Earth's history. Imagine lava flows that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to western Montana, covering an area larger than the state of Texas in basalt, up to several thousand feet thick. The volume of lava involved in these eruptions was so vast that it could have covered the entire continental United States in a layer of rock several feet deep. But this was just the beginning. As the North American continent slowly drifted southwest over the stationary hotspot, moving at about the same rate your fingernails grow, the focus of volcanic activity began to migrate northeast. Like a cosmic blowtorch held against the bottom of the continent, the hotspot burned a track of massive calderas and volcanic fields across what is now the Snake River Plain of Idaho. Following this track today is like reading the geological diary of one of Earth's most powerful forces. Each caldera along the Snake River Plain represents a moment when the hot spot broke through the Earth's crust with catastrophic violence. The Bruno Garbage Caldera, the Twin Falls Caldera, the Picabo Caldera. Each name marks a point where the hot spot focused its energy, creating eruptions that dwarfed anything in recorded human history. These ancient eruptions followed a pattern that would eventually be repeated at Yellowstone. First, magma would accumulate in vast underground chambers, slowly melting and incorporating the surrounding rock. The pressure would build over hundreds of thousands of years, creating bulges and uplifts in the Earth's surface. Finally, when the pressure became too great for the overlying rock to contain, the surface would collapse catastrophically, creating a caldera and releasing unimaginable volumes of volcanic material into the atmosphere. The mechanics of these supervolcanic eruptions are almost beyond comprehension. When a hotspot eruption begins, it doesn't start with the familiar cone-building process we associate with most volcanoes. Instead, long fissures open in the Earth's crust, sometimes extending for dozens of miles. From these fissures, curtains of lava fountain hundreds or thousands of feet into the air. But the lava is only part of the story. The real danger comes from the pyroclastic flows, avalanches of superheated gas, ash, and rock fragments that race across the landscape at hundreds of miles per hour. These flows are so hot they can melt metal, and so fast they can overtop mountain ranges. Everything in their path is instantly incinerated or buried under hundreds of feet of volcanic debris. The ash from these eruptions is equally devastating, but on a global scale. Supervolcanic eruptions can inject so much ash into the stratosphere that they alter global climate for years or even decades. The 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia, which was tiny compared to a hotspot eruption, caused global crop failures and famines. A Yellowstone-scale eruption would make Tambora look like a firecracker. As the North American continent continued its slow drift over the hotspot, each eruption left its mark on the landscape. The Snake River Plain became a sort of geological museum, preserving the evidence of 17 million years of hotspot activity. If you drive across southern Idaho today, you're traveling through the scar left by one of the most powerful geological forces on Earth. But the hotspot wasn't just creating destruction. Each massive eruption was also creating new land, new ecosystems, and new opportunities for life. The volcanic soils left behind by these eruptions are among the most fertile on Earth, rich in minerals and nutrients that support abundant plant and animal communities. The heat from the hotspot also creates more subtle but equally important effects. Geothermal systems develop around hotspot volcanoes, creating hot springs, geysers, and other thermal features. These systems support unique ecosystems with specially adapted plants and animals that can thrive in conditions that would be lethal to most life forms. As we follow the hotspot's track northeast through time, we can see how it has shaped not just the geology, but the entire ecology of the western United States. The fertile volcanic soils support different plant communities than the surrounding areas. The thermal features create microclimates that extend the range of certain species far beyond their normal limits. And the dramatic topography created by repeated eruptions provides habitat diversity that supports an unusually rich variety of life forms. Around 2 million years ago, the hotspot finally reached the area we now call Yellowstone. But by this time, the hotspot had evolved and matured. The early flood basalt eruptions of the Columbia River region had given way to a more focused, more explosive style of volcanism. The hotspot was now ready to create its masterpiece, the Yellowstone caldera system. The arrival of the hotspot in the Yellowstone region coincided with another important geological development. The regional stress field was changing as the North American continent continued to drift and deform. This created a situation where the hotspot's energy could be focused into a smaller area, concentrating its power and creating the potential for even more massive eruptions than had occurred during the Snake River Plain period. Deep beneath what would become Yellowstone, the hotspot began to melt its way through the thick continental crust. This process was gradual at first, taking hundreds of thousands of years to create the first large magma chamber. But once established, this chamber would become the focal point for some of the largest volcanic eruptions in Earth's history. The stage was now set for the next chapter in Yellowstone's story, the great eruptions that would create the caldera we see today. But before those catastrophic events could occur, the hotspot had to complete its long journey from the depths of the Earth to the surface, melting and incorporating millions of cubic miles of continental crust along the way. This process of crustal melting is what gives Yellowstone its unique character. Unlike oceanic hotspots like Hawaii, which produce relatively simple basaltic lavas, continental hotspots like Yellowstone produce complex silica-rich magmas that are much more explosive. When these magmas finally reach the surface, they create eruptions of unprecedented violence and scale. The Yellowstone hotspot had traveled nearly 600 miles and persisted for 17 million years by the time it reached its current location. It had burned a track across an entire continent, creating landscapes and ecosystems that continue to evolve today. And now, focused beneath the high plateau of northwestern Wyoming, it was ready to begin the final phase of its geological symphony, the creation of Yellowstone as we know it today. As you rest quietly, let's journey now to witness three of the most powerful volcanic events in Earth's recent history. These eruptions were so massive, so transformative, that they literally reshaped not just the Yellowstone region, but influenced climate and life across the entire planet. Close your eyes and prepare to witness geological forces of almost unimaginable power. Three extraordinarily large explosive eruptions in the past 2.1 million years each created a giant caldera within or west of Yellowstone National Park. These weren't ordinary volcanic eruptions. They were supervolcanic events, each hundreds or thousands of times more powerful than any eruption witnessed by human civilization. The first great eruption occurred 2.1 million years ago, creating what geologists call the Huckleberry Ridge Tuff. Picture the Yellowstone region on the eve of this catastrophic event. The landscape was already elevated and mountainous, shaped by millions of years of tectonic activity. Beneath the surface, a massive magma chamber had been growing for perhaps 1 million years, fed by the relentless heat of the Yellowstone hotspot. The first major eruption of the Yellowstone volcano, which occurred 2.1 million years ago, is among the largest volcanic eruptions known, covering over 5,790 square miles with ash. But to understand the true scale of this event, we need to think beyond numbers and statistics. Imagine a chamber of molten rock larger than Lake Superior, pressurized to the breaking point, finally rupturing through the Earth's crust. The eruption began not with a single explosion, but with a series of vents opening across a vast area. From these vents, curtains of lava and superheated gas shot thousands of feet into the atmosphere. The noise would have been indescribable, a roar so deep and powerful that it would have been felt as much as heard, shaking the ground for hundreds of miles in every direction. But the most devastating aspect of this eruption wasn't the lava, it was the pyroclastic flows. These avalanches of superheated gas, ash, and rock fragments raced outward from the eruption vents at speeds exceeding 300 miles per hour. Nothing could outrun them. Forests were instantly incinerated, animals were buried alive, and the very air became lethal to breathe. The pyroclastic flows from this first great eruption traveled as far as southern California and northern Kansas, a distance of over 1,000 miles. Areas that are now major cities would have been buried under hundreds of feet of hot volcanic debris. The flows were so hot that they welded together as they cooled, creating the rock formation we now call the Huckleberry Ridge Tuff. Meanwhile, high above the eruption, something equally devastating was occurring. The force of the eruption had injected enormous quantities of ash and sulfur compounds into the stratosphere, creating a volcanic winter that lasted for years. Global temperatures dropped by several degrees, growing seasons shortened, and many species faced extinction pressures. After perhaps several weeks or months of continuous eruption, the magma chamber finally exhausted itself. With its support gone, the ground above the chamber collapsed, creating a caldera roughly 50 miles long and 40 miles wide. This collapse wasn't gradual. It happened catastrophically, with blocks of crust the size of mountains dropping thousands of feet in a matter of hours or days. For hundreds of thousands of years after this first great eruption, the Yellowstone region remained a scarred and largely lifeless landscape. The caldera gradually filled with lakes, and vegetation slowly began to recolonize the devastated terrain. But deep underground, the hotspot continued its work, slowly building toward the next catastrophic event. The second great eruption occurred 1.3 million years ago, creating the Mesa Falls Tuff. This eruption was somewhat smaller than the first, but it followed a similar pattern. Once again, a massive magma chamber built up over hundreds of thousands of years until the pressure became unsustainable. Once again, the eruption created pyroclastic flows that devastated vast areas and ash falls that affected global climate. The Mesa Falls eruption created a caldera about 10 miles across, located west of the current Yellowstone caldera. But perhaps more importantly, it marked a shift in the character of Yellowstone volcanism. The eruptions were becoming more focused, more explosive, and more silica-rich, setting the stage for the most recent and most famous of the great eruptions. The third and most recent great eruption occurred 631,000 to 640,000 years ago, forming the Yellowstone caldera as we now see it. This eruption, which created the Lava Creek Tuff, was the event that shaped the Yellowstone we know today. By 640,000 years ago, the Yellowstone hotspot had been building pressure beneath the current park area for hundreds of thousands of years. The magma chamber that fed this eruption was enormous. Recent studies suggest it contained around 4,000 cubic kilometers of partially molten material, making it one of the largest known magma chambers on Earth. The signs leading up to this eruption would have been unmistakable to any observer. The ground would have been rising for thousands of years as the magma chamber swelled beneath it. Earthquakes would have been frequent and increasingly violent. Hot springs and geysers would have been appearing throughout the region as groundwater came into contact with the heating rocks above the magma chamber. When the eruption finally began, it exceeded even the violence of its predecessors. The initial explosions were so powerful they could be heard across most of North America. Ash from this eruption has been found in fossil deposits from Mexico to Canada and from California to the Mississippi River. The three caldera-forming eruptions, respectively, were about 6,000, 700, and 2,500 times larger than the May 18, 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. To put this in perspective, the Mount St. Helens eruption, which was considered a major volcanic event, ejected about 1 cubic kilometer of material. The Lava Creek eruption ejected over 1,000 cubic kilometers, enough to bury the entire state of Delaware under 30 feet of volcanic debris. The pyroclastic flows from this eruption were even more extensive than those from the Huckleberry Ridge event. They flowed down river valleys like liquid avalanches, following the path of least resistance, but overriding any obstacle less than several hundred feet high. The flows were so voluminous that they filled entire valleys, creating temporary dams that formed huge lakes when they cooled. As with the previous eruptions, the climax came when the magma chamber emptied and the overlying crust collapsed. But this collapse created the largest and most perfectly preserved caldera in the Yellowstone system, an oval depression roughly 30 miles wide and 45 miles long that encompasses much of what is now the central portion of Yellowstone National Park. The most recent major eruption, 640,000 years ago, caused the ground to collapse into the magma reservoir, leaving behind the large caldera that largely defines Yellowstone's geography today. This collapse created a depression so large that it wouldn't be fully recognized by geologists until the advent of satellite photography in the 1960s. The aftermath of the Lava Creek eruption was similar to that of its predecessors, but with some important differences. The volcanic winter it created was severe but relatively short-lived. More importantly, by this time in Earth's history, life had become more resilient and adaptable. While the eruption certainly caused massive ecological disruption, recovery began more quickly than it had after the earlier events. Within a few thousand years of the eruption, the caldera had filled with a large lake, fed by hot springs and snowmelt from the surrounding mountains. This lake created a unique ecosystem where thermophilic organisms, creatures adapted to hot conditions, could thrive alongside more typical freshwater species. But the story of these three great eruptions isn't just about destruction and recovery. Each eruption also created the foundations for the unique landscape we see in Yellowstone today. The ash and debris from these events created the varied topography of hills, valleys, and plateaus that characterize the park. The mineral-rich volcanic soils support the diverse plant communities that make Yellowstone one of the world's most important ecosystems. Perhaps most importantly, these eruptions created the thermal features that make Yellowstone truly unique. The heat from the still-active magma chamber, combined with the complex system of fractures and fissures created by the caldera collapses, allows groundwater to circulate deep into the earth before returning to the surface as hot springs and geysers. As we reflect on these three great eruptions, we're reminded of the awesome power of geological force and the resilience of life in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. Each eruption was a catastrophe of global proportions, yet each also created opportunities for new forms of life and new types of ecosystems to develop. The pattern these eruptions established, roughly 600,000 to 800,000 years between major events, has led some scientists to speculate about when the next great eruption might occur. But such predictions are largely meaningless on human timescales. The Yellowstone hotspot operates on geological time, and its next major expression might be tomorrow or 100,000 years in the future. For now, the caldera rests quietly, showing only subtle signs of the immense forces that lie beneath. The ground rises and falls gently as the magma chamber breathes. Hot springs bubble peacefully in meadows where pyroclastic flows once raged. And life, in all its infinite creativity, has found ways to not just survive, but flourish in this land shaped by fire. In the gentle stillness of this moment, let's witness one of nature's most remarkable stories, the return of life to landscapes devastated by volcanic catastrophe. After each of Yellowstone's great eruptions, the land seemed utterly lifeless, buried beneath hundreds of feet of ash and debris. Yet life, with patience that matches geological time itself, always finds a way to return. Picture the Yellowstone region in the immediate aftermath of the Lava Creek eruption, 640,000 years ago. The landscape would have been almost lunar in its desolation. Endless stretches of grey ash and volcanic debris under a sky still darkened by volcanic dust. No trees, no grass, no visible life of any kind. The silence would have been absolute, broken only by the whisper of wind across the barren surface and the occasional rumble of aftershocks from deep beneath the caldera. But even in this apparent wasteland, the seeds of recovery were already present. Life has an extraordinary ability to persist in the most unlikely places, and volcanic landscapes, despite their initial sterility, eventually become some of the most fertile and biologically diverse environments on Earth. The first colonizers weren't plants as we typically think of them, but microscopic organisms, bacteria and archaea, that could survive in the harsh conditions immediately following the eruption. These extremophiles, as scientists call them, began the slow work of breaking down volcanic rock and ash, creating the first primitive soils. Some of these bacteria could derive energy directly from the chemical compounds in volcanic rocks, while others formed partnerships with the earliest arriving plant spores. The process of ecological succession in volcanic landscapes follows predictable patterns, but each step requires enormous patience. Wind-blown spores and seeds would have been arriving constantly, carried from distant, unaffected areas. Most would perish in the harsh conditions, but a few would find tiny pockets where conditions were just right for germination, perhaps in the shadow of a boulder where moisture could collect, or near a hot spring where geothermal heat moderated the harsh climate. The first visible plants to establish themselves were likely mosses and lichens. These hardy organisms are perfectly suited to colonize bare rock surfaces. Lichens, which are actually partnerships between fungi and algae, can extract nutrients directly from rock surfaces through chemical processes. As they grow, die, and decay, they create thin layers of organic matter that other plants can eventually use. Mosses, with their ability to absorb moisture directly from the air and their tolerance for extreme temperature fluctuations, were equally important pioneer species. These simple plants could establish themselves in cracks and crevices in the volcanic rock, slowly accumulating organic matter and providing stepping stones for larger plants to follow. The volcanic soils created by Yellowstone's eruptions possessed unique properties that would eventually make them extraordinarily fertile. Volcanic ash is rich in potassium, phosphorus, and other essential plant nutrients. The glassy nature of fresh ash means these nutrients are slowly released as the ash weathers, providing a steady supply of fertilizer for developing plant communities. But the early stages of plant colonization were incredibly slow. It might have taken several thousand years for the first true forests to begin establishing themselves after each major eruption. The timeline depended on many factors: climate conditions, the thickness of ash deposits, the proximity of seed sources, and the complex interactions between different species as they arrived and established themselves. As the first hardy shrubs and small trees began to appear, they created what ecologists call nurse plant effects. These pioneer woody plants provided shelter and slightly modified microclimates that allowed more sensitive species to establish themselves. A single juniper or pine tree growing alone in a vast ash field might create conditions suitable for dozens of other plant species within its shelter. Return of forests to Yellowstone after each eruption was not a simple replay of what had been there before. Each recovery created new combinations of species, new ecological relationships, and new adaptations to the unique conditions created by the volcanic landscape. Species that arrived first had advantages in claiming the best growing sites, while later arrivals had to adapt to whatever niches remained available. Consider the whitebark pine, a tree that has become emblematic of Yellowstone's high-elevation ecosystems. These remarkable trees are adapted to some of the harshest conditions on the continent: short growing seasons, intense solar radiation, extreme temperature fluctuations, and nutrient-poor soils. In the aftermath of volcanic eruptions, whitebark pines were likely among the first tree species to recolonize the highest elevations, establishing themselves on sites too harsh for other conifers. The relationship between whitebark pines and Clark's nutcracker birds represents one of the most remarkable examples of co-evolution in North America. The nutcrackers cache thousands of whitebark pine seeds each fall, burying them in scattered locations across the landscape. While the birds retrieve most of these caches during winter and early spring, they inevitably forget some locations. These forgotten seed caches become the nuclei for new whitebark pine stands, often in locations far from parent trees. This relationship would have been crucial during post-eruption recovery periods. Nutcrackers, with their ability to fly long distances and their instinct to cache seeds in diverse locations, could rapidly transport whitebark pine seeds into newly available habitats. The trees, in turn, provided the birds with their primary food source, and through their ability to establish in harsh conditions, created stepping stones for forest expansion. At lower elevations, different species played key roles in ecosystem recovery. Lodgepole pines, which now dominate much of Yellowstone's forested area, have their own remarkable adaptations for post-catastrophe recovery. Many lodgepole pine populations produce serotinous cones that remain sealed with resin and can stay viable on the tree for decades until opened by the heat of fire. While volcanic eruptions and forest fires are different types of disturbance, they create similar opportunities for species adapted to rapid colonization of disturbed sites. Lodgepole pines, with their ability to grow rapidly in full sunlight and their tolerance for poor soils, would have been well suited to colonizing ash-covered areas once they began to stabilize. The establishment of tree cover marked a crucial turning point in post-eruption recovery. Trees create their own climate, moderating temperature extremes and creating more favorable conditions for understory plants. Their roots help stabilize soil and prevent erosion, while their leaf litter adds organic matter that supports increasingly complex soil. Communities, as forest canopies began to close, typically several thousand years after each major eruption, the character of plant communities changed dramatically. Shade-tolerant species began to appear in the understory, creating the multi-layered forest structure that characterizes mature ecosystems. Engelmann spruce and subalpine fir, both slow-growing but shade-tolerant species, gradually began to establish themselves beneath the pioneer pine forests. The development of understory plant communities brought with it an explosion of biological diversity. Forest floors that had been largely bare began to support rich communities of wildflowers, ferns, grasses, and shrubs. Each species that established itself created new opportunities and niches for others. Huckleberries, serviceberries, and other fruit-producing shrubs became important not just for their own sake, but because they began to attract and support animal life. The first insects to recolonize the recovering forests found these flowering and fruit-producing plants, and their presence in turn attracted insect-eating birds and other animals. The return of pollinators was crucial for the continued development of plant communities. Bees, butterflies, flies, and other pollinating insects allowed plants to reproduce sexually, creating the genetic diversity necessary for long-term adaptation to volcanic soils and climate conditions. Some plants that arrived early in the succession process relied on wind pollination or vegetative reproduction, but the establishment of complex ecological networks required the return of diverse pollinator communities. Mycorrhizal fungi played an equally important but less visible role in ecosystem recovery. These beneficial fungi form partnerships with plant roots, extending the effective reach of root systems and helping plants extract nutrients from poor soils. In volcanic landscapes, where soils are initially low in organic matter and have unusual mineral compositions, mycorrhizal partnerships are often essential for plant survival. The fungal networks that develop in mature forests can be incredibly complex, connecting multiple plant species and facilitating the sharing of nutrients and information. These wood-wide web networks would have been crucial during ecosystem recovery, allowing established plants to support newcomers and enabling rapid responses to environmental challenges. Water played a special role in Yellowstone's ecosystem recovery due to the unique hydrothermal features created by the volcanic activity. Hot springs and geysers created localized warm microclimates that supported plant growth even during cold periods. The minerals dissolved in thermal waters created unique soil chemistries that supported specialized plant communities. Some plants became specifically adapted to these thermal environments. Thermophilic bacteria formed colorful mats around hot springs, creating living landscapes of brilliant oranges, yellows, and greens. Plants that could tolerate the unusual chemistry and temperature fluctuations around thermal features often found themselves in a botanical paradise. Warm soils, extended growing seasons, and minimal competition from species not adapted to these conditions. The recovery of plant communities after each of Yellowstone's great eruptions demonstrates one of ecology's fundamental principles: the resilience of life in the face of catastrophic disturbance. While individual eruptions created landscapes that appeared utterly lifeless, they also created opportunities for new combinations of species and new types of ecosystems to develop. Each recovery period was unique, influenced by climate conditions, the particular species available for colonization, and the specific characteristics of the volcanic deposits. The Yellowstone we see today is not simply a restoration of what existed before the last great eruption, but rather a new creation, a unique combination of species and ecological relationships that could only have developed in response to the particular sequence of disturbances and recoveries that shaped this landscape. The plants that colonized post-eruption Yellowstone were not just passively filling empty niches. They were actively creating the conditions that would support the incredibly diverse ecosystems we see today. Their patient work of soil building, climate modification, and habitat creation laid the foundation for everything that would follow: the return of animals, the establishment of food webs, and ultimately the development of one of North America's most remarkable wilderness areas. In the gentle rhythm of this story, we can hear echoes of our own relationship with nature. Like the plants that slowly colonized Yellowstone's volcanic landscapes, we too are part of an ongoing process of recovery and renewal. The landscapes we inhabit today, whether urban or wild, are the products of countless cycles of disturbance and recovery, each one creating new opportunities and new challenges. As we continue our gentle journey through time, let's turn now to the human story of Yellowstone, a story that began not with the establishment of the national park in 1872, but thousands of years earlier, when the first peoples discovered this land of fire and wonder. In the quiet of this moment, imagine walking ancient trails that have been used for millennia, following paths that connect not just places, but peoples, traditions, and ways of understanding the world. The human history of Yellowstone stretches back at least 11,000 years, to a time when the last ice age was ending and the landscape was slowly emerging from beneath massive glaciers. These first inhabitants encountered a Yellowstone that was both familiar and strange, familiar in its basic geography shaped by the great eruptions, but strange in its climate, vegetation, and animal communities that differed dramatically from what we see today. Archaeological evidence suggests that the earliest peoples to inhabit the Yellowstone region were part of the Clovis culture, skilled hunter-gatherers who specialized in hunting large game animals, including mammoths, mastodons, and giant bison. These were not casual visitors, but people who knew the land intimately, who understood its seasonal rhythms, and who developed sophisticated strategies for surviving and thriving in this challenging environment. Picture these early hunters camped beside a thermal spring on a cold morning 10,000 years ago. Steam rises from the hot water, creating a microclimate that makes this spot comfortable even when snow covers the surrounding landscape. The hunters understand that this warm water never freezes, making it a reliable source of drinking water throughout the winter. They know which plants grow near these thermal features, and which ones are safe to eat. They've learned to use the heat from hot springs to cook food and warm shelters. The relationship between these early peoples and Yellowstone's geothermal features was profound and complex. Unlike later European visitors, who would view the hot springs and geysers primarily as curiosities or tourist attractions, Native Americans understood these features as sacred places, connections between the earth and the spirit world, sources of healing, and integral parts of the landscape's living system. Over thousands of years, distinct cultural groups emerged and evolved in the Yellowstone region. The Crow, Blackfeet, Flathead, Shoshone, Nez Perce, and other tribes each developed their own relationships with this landscape, their own stories to explain its remarkable features, and their own traditions for using its resources sustainably. The Crow people, who called themselves Apsa'aluke, meaning children of the large-beaked bird, considered the area that includes Yellowstone to be part of their traditional homeland. They developed sophisticated knowledge of the region's seasonal patterns, following herds of elk, deer, and bison through annual migration cycles that could cover hundreds of miles. Their oral traditions contain detailed information about the behavior of geysers, the locations of the best hunting grounds, and the properties of various thermal springs. The Shoshone people, including the eastern Shoshone, Goshute, and the northern Shoshone, also had deep connections to the Yellowstone region. They were particularly skilled at high-altitude hunting and developed specialized techniques for pursuing bighorn sheep and other mountain animals. Their knowledge of plant foods was encyclopedic. They knew which berries ripened when and where, which roots were most nutritious at different times of year, and which plants had medicinal properties. One of the most remarkable aspects of Native American use of the Yellowstone region was the sophisticated trail system that connected different tribal territories and seasonal camps. These trails, many of which are still visible today, represent thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about the safest and most efficient routes through challenging mountain terrain. The Bannock Trail, for example, was a major thoroughfare that connected the Snake River Plain with the buffalo hunting grounds of the northern plains. This trail passed directly through what is now Yellowstone National Park, following a carefully planned route that took advantage of natural corridors, reliable water sources, and strategic camping spots. Traveling this trail required intimate knowledge of weather patterns, seasonal hazards, and the location of resources needed to sustain large groups of people and their horses during multi-week journeys. Native American knowledge of Yellowstone's wildlife was remarkably sophisticated. They understood animal behavior, migration patterns, and population cycles in ways that modern wildlife biologists are still working to replicate. They knew, for instance, that certain meadows would be crowded with elk during specific weeks of the autumn rutting season, and they planned hunting expeditions accordingly. The relationship between Native Americans and Yellowstone's thermal features deserves special attention because it reveals fundamentally different ways of understanding and interacting with the natural world. While European American settlers would later view geysers and hot springs primarily through the lens of science and tourism, Native Americans understood these features as sacred sites with spiritual significance. Many tribes have stories that explain the origin of Yellowstone's thermal features. The Crow people tell of a great battle between mythical beings that left the earth cracked and bleeding, with the hot springs representing the earth's wounds. The Shoshone have traditions about thermal springs being the homes of spirits who could provide healing and guidance to those who approached them with proper respect and ceremony. These weren't just colorful myths, but sophisticated ways of encoding important practical information about thermal features. Stories that emphasized the sacred nature of hot springs also served to regulate human behavior around these potentially dangerous features. Traditional protocols for approaching and using thermal springs included safety practices that prevented accidents and ensured that these valuable resources remained available for future generations. The material culture of Native Americans in the Yellowstone region shows remarkable adaptation to local conditions. They developed specialized tools for high-altitude hunting, including techniques for manufacturing arrow points from local obsidian. The glass-like volcanic rock found throughout the Yellowstone region was highly prized for tool-making because it could be knapped into extremely sharp edges. Obsidian from Yellowstone sources has been found in archaeological sites across much of western North America, indicating that the region was part of extensive trade networks that connected diverse tribal groups. Native Americans not only used Yellowstone's resources themselves, but also served as intermediaries in trade relationships that spanned the continent. The seasonal round of activities in the Yellowstone region required careful planning and detailed knowledge of environmental conditions. Spring brought opportunities for gathering early plant foods and hunting animals emerging from winter ranges. Summer was the time for major communal activities, large hunting expeditions, intertribal gatherings, and the collection of plant foods that would sustain communities through the winter. Autumn was perhaps the most critical season, when communities needed to harvest enough meat and plant foods to survive the long mountain winters. The timing of these autumn hunts was crucial. Too early, and the animals wouldn't be in their best condition. Too late, and severe weather might make travel dangerous or impossible. Winter use of the Yellowstone region was more limited, but still important. Small groups would sometimes establish winter camps near thermal springs, taking advantage of the warm microclimates and reliable water sources. These winter camps served as bases for hunting expeditions and provided opportunities for intensive tool-making and other craft activities. The spiritual significance of Yellowstone for Native American peoples cannot be understated. Many tribes consider the region to be a sacred landscape where the physical and spiritual worlds intersect. The dramatic geothermal features, the abundance of wildlife, and the region's position at the headwaters of major river systems all contributed to its spiritual importance. Vision quests and other spiritual ceremonies were conducted in the Yellowstone region, often at specific locations chosen for their spiritual power. These might include prominent peaks, unusual rock formations, or particularly active thermal features. The spiritual practices conducted in these places were deeply personal and often involved seeking guidance from spiritual beings believed to inhabit the landscape. The establishment of Yellowstone National Park in 1872 marked a dramatic change in how the region was managed and who had access to its resources. The park's enabling legislation made no provision for continued Native American use of the area, despite thousands of years of prior occupation. This created conflicts that persisted for decades and reflected broader patterns of displacement and cultural disruption that characterized Euro-American expansion across the continent. The exclusion of Native Americans from Yellowstone was part of a larger federal policy aimed at confining tribal peoples to reservations and assimilating them into Euro-American culture. Park administrators actively worked to prevent Native American hunting and gathering in Yellowstone, even when these activities were taking place on lands that had been used continuously for millennia. However, the connection between Native American peoples and Yellowstone was too deep to be severed by administrative policies. Many tribal members continued to visit the region when possible, maintaining spiritual connections and passing on traditional knowledge to younger generations. Some found employment with the Park Service or with tourism businesses, becoming bridges between their traditional cultures and the new Euro-American management of the landscape. Today, there is growing recognition of the importance of Native American perspectives on Yellowstone's management and interpretation. Tribal members serve as consultants on archaeological projects, share traditional knowledge with park researchers, and work to ensure that Native American voices are included in decisions about the park's future. The traditional ecological knowledge held by Native American peoples offers valuable insights for modern park management. Their understanding of wildlife behavior, plant ecology, and ecosystem dynamics has been accumulated over thousands of years of careful observation and interaction with the landscape. This knowledge is increasingly recognized as complementary to scientific research and essential for comprehensive understanding of Yellowstone's ecosystems. The story of Native Americans in Yellowstone reminds us that this landscape has always been home to people who understood themselves to be part of the natural world rather than separate from it. Their sustainable use of Yellowstone's resources over thousands of years demonstrates that human presence doesn't necessarily degrade natural ecosystems when guided by appropriate cultural values and management practices. As we reflect on this long history of human presence in Yellowstone, we're reminded that the landscape we see today isn't untouched wilderness, but rather an ecosystem that has been shaped by thousands of years of human interaction. The trails we hike, the meadows we admire, and even the distribution of some plant and animal communities all bear the subtle influence of Native American land management practices. In the gentle rhythm of this ancient story, we can hear echoes of different ways of being human in the world, ways that emphasize reciprocity rather than domination, spiritual connection rather than scientific detachment, and community responsibility rather than individual rights. These perspectives, preserved in tribal traditions and increasingly valued by modern park managers, offer important insights for anyone seeking to understand not just what Yellowstone is, but what it has always meant to be fully human in relationship with the natural world. Let's settle deeper into our journey now, as we enter the realm of Yellowstone's magnificent animals. Close your eyes and imagine yourself walking quietly through a misty meadow at dawn, where the air is filled with the sounds of awakening wildlife. The distant bugle of an elk, the splash of a beaver in a nearby pond, and the soft whisper of wings as birds begin their daily activities. Yellowstone is home to the largest concentration of mammals in the lower 48 states, a living community that includes some of North America's most iconic species. But this wasn't always the case. After each of the great volcanic eruptions, animal life had to slowly recolonize the devastated landscape, creating the complex ecosystem we see today through countless generations of adaptation and interaction. The story of animals in Yellowstone begins with the small creatures, the insects, spiders, and other invertebrates that arrived soon after plant communities began to establish themselves. These tiny animals, often overlooked by casual visitors, form the foundation of all the food webs that support larger and more charismatic species. Picture a summer meadow in Yellowstone, seemingly peaceful and quiet. But if you could see this meadow through the eyes of an ecologist, you would discover an incredibly busy world. Thousands of species of insects are going about their daily lives, pollinating flowers, decomposing organic matter, serving as food for birds and other animals, and generally keeping the ecosystem functioning smoothly. Among the first larger animals to recolonize Yellowstone after volcanic eruptions would have been birds. Their ability to fly allows them to cross barriers that would stop ground-dwelling animals, and many bird species are remarkably adaptable to changing environmental conditions. Yellowstone today hosts over 285 bird species, from tiny hummingbirds that weigh less than a nickel to massive trumpeter swans with wingspans approaching 8 feet. The return of raptors, hawks, eagles, and owls marked an important milestone in ecosystem recovery. These predatory birds require stable populations of prey species, so their presence indicates that food webs have developed sufficient complexity to support multiple trophic levels. The golden eagles that soar above Yellowstone's peaks today are descendants of birds that helped pioneer the recolonization of this landscape. But perhaps no group of animals captures the imagination quite like Yellowstone's large mammals. The park is home to one of the world's few remaining intact large mammal assemblages, a community of big animals that closely resembles what existed across much of North America before European settlement. The American bison represents one of conservation's greatest success stories. These massive animals, which can weigh up to 2,000 pounds, once numbered in the millions across the Great Plains and mountain valleys of North America. By the 1880s, unregulated hunting had reduced the entire North American bison population to fewer than 1,000 individuals, with only about 25 animals remaining in Yellowstone. The Yellowstone bison herd survived because the park's remote location and harsh winters protected them from the intensive hunting that eliminated bison elsewhere. Today, Yellowstone is home to the only continuously wild bison population in the United States, animals whose genetic lineage stretches back thousands of years, unbroken by captivity or domestication. Watching a bison herd move across a Yellowstone meadow is like witnessing a scene from the Pleistocene. These animals are perfectly adapted to the park's challenging environment. Their massive heads and powerful neck muscles allow them to sweep aside deep snow to reach grass beneath. Their thick winter coats provide insulation in temperatures that can drop to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Elk represent another cornerstone species in Yellowstone's ecosystem. These magnificent animals, with their towering antlers and haunting bugle calls, are closely tied to the park's seasonal rhythms. In autumn, the mountains echo with the sounds of elk rutting season as bulls compete for the right to mate with herds of females. The elk's annual migration between summer and winter ranges is one of Yellowstone's most impressive natural spectacles. As snow begins to accumulate at high elevations, thousands of elk move to lower valleys where they can find food throughout the winter. This migration requires intimate knowledge of the landscape, knowledge passed down from mothers to calves, generation after generation. The relationship between elk and their environment illustrates the complex web of interactions that characterizes healthy ecosystems. Elk browsing affects the growth and distribution of willows, aspen, and other plants. These plants, in turn, provide habitat for songbirds, materials for beaver dams, and food for other herbivores. The presence or absence of elk in any given area can influence the structure of entire plant communities. The return of wolves to Yellowstone in 1995 marked one of the most significant wildlife restoration efforts in North American history. Wolves had been systematically eliminated from the park in the early 20th century as part of federal predator control policies. Their absence had profound effects on Yellowstone's ecosystem, allowing elk populations to grow unchecked and altering the behavior and distribution of many other species. The reintroduction of wolves involved capturing animals from Canadian populations and releasing them in Yellowstone after a careful acclimation period. The project was controversial, with supporters arguing that wolves were essential for ecosystem health, and opponents worried about impacts on livestock and hunting outside the park. Today, Yellowstone's wolf population fluctuates between 80 and 110 individuals organized into 8 to 12 packs. These wolves have restored natural predation patterns that had been missing for nearly 70 years. Their presence has influenced not just elk numbers, but elk behavior, creating what scientists call a landscape of fear that has allowed vegetation communities to recover in areas where elk previously browsed heavily. The story of wolves in Yellowstone demonstrates the concept of a keystone species, a species whose impact on an ecosystem is disproportionately large compared to its abundance. The relatively small number of wolves in Yellowstone influences the behavior and population dynamics of thousands of elk, which in turn affects vegetation, which influences countless other species from songbirds to stream ecosystems. Mountain lions, another major predator, have maintained continuous populations in Yellowstone throughout the historical period. These solitary cats are perfectly adapted to the park's mountainous terrain, using their powerful legs and retractable claws to navigate steep, rocky slopes with remarkable grace. Mountain lions primarily hunt deer and elk, but they're opportunistic predators that will take everything from rodents to young bison. Black bears and grizzly bears represent two species with very different relationships to the Yellowstone ecosystem. Black bears, smaller and more adaptable, have maintained relatively stable populations throughout the park's history. These intelligent omnivores exploit a wide range of food sources, from berries and nuts to insects and small mammals. Grizzly bears, in contrast, have experienced dramatic population fluctuations and remain one of Yellowstone's most carefully managed species. These massive omnivores, adult males can weigh up to 600 pounds, require enormous territories and diverse food sources to survive. A single grizzly's annual range might encompass hundreds of square miles, and their diet changes dramatically throughout the seasons. In early spring, grizzly bears emerging from hibernation often feed on winter-killed animals, using their powerful sense of smell to locate carcasses beneath the snow. As spring progresses, they turn to roots, grasses, and other early vegetation. Summer brings opportunities to feed on salmon in some areas, though this is less important in Yellowstone than in coastal regions. Autumn is crucial for grizzlies, as they must accumulate enough fat to survive winter hibernation. The relationship between grizzly bears and whitebark pine seeds illustrates the interconnected nature of Yellowstone's ecosystems. Whitebark pine seeds are extremely nutritious and represent a critical fall food source for bears preparing for hibernation. But these seeds are not directly available to bears. They must be harvested by Clark's nutcracker birds and cached in scattered locations throughout the forest. Bears have learned to locate and raid these bird caches, obtaining the high-fat seeds they need for winter survival. Climate change and disease are threatening whitebark pine populations throughout their range, creating challenges for bears, nutcrackers, and the entire high-elevation ecosystem. This situation illustrates how environmental changes can cascade through ecosystems in unexpected ways, affecting species that might seem unconnected. Smaller mammals play equally important roles in Yellowstone's ecosystems, though they're often overlooked by visitors focused on large, charismatic species. Beavers, for example, are ecosystem engineers whose dam-building activities create wetland habitats that support dozens of other species. Their ponds provide breeding habitat for amphibians, nesting sites for waterfowl, and drinking water for many terrestrial animals. The complex engineering projects undertaken by beaver families, dams, lodges, and canal systems, can persist for decades and continue to influence hydrology and vegetation long after the beavers have moved to new areas. Some beaver ponds eventually fill with sediment and become meadows, but they retain the rich soils and distinctive plant communities that developed during their wetland phase. Pika populations in Yellowstone's high-elevation areas serve as indicators of climate change impacts. These small, round-eared relatives of rabbits are adapted to cold conditions and are sensitive to temperature increases. Pika spend their short mountain summers gathering and drying plants, creating hay piles that sustain them through the long winters. Their distinctive alarm calls echo across talus slopes, warning other pika of approaching predators. River otters have made a remarkable recovery in Yellowstone's waterways after being nearly eliminated by trapping in the early 20th century. These playful aquatic mammals are indicators of healthy aquatic ecosystems, as they require clean water and abundant fish populations to survive. Watching a family of otters play in a Yellowstone river or lake is one of the park's special treats for patient observers. The seasonal rhythms of animal life in Yellowstone follow patterns that have been established over thousands of years. Spring brings the birth of young animals and the return of migratory species. Summer is a time of abundance when animals focus on growth and fattening. Autumn triggers preparation for winter, migrations to lower elevations, mating seasons, and intensive feeding to build fat reserves. Winter in Yellowstone tests every animal's adaptations to their absolute limits. Temperatures can remain below zero for weeks at a time, and snow depths can exceed 10 feet in some areas. Only the most hardy and well-adapted species can survive these conditions, and their strategies for winter survival are remarkably diverse. Some animals, like grizzly bears and ground squirrels, avoid winter entirely through hibernation. Others, like elk and bison, have evolved thick winter coats and behavioral adaptations that allow them to remain active throughout the cold season. Still others, like many bird species, migrate to more favorable climates and return when conditions improve. The animal communities we see in Yellowstone today represent the endpoint of thousands of years of evolution, adaptation, and ecological sorting. Each species has found its niche in this complex ecosystem, and each plays a role in maintaining the intricate balance that allows the whole system to function. But this balance is not static. Animal populations fluctuate in response to weather patterns, disease outbreaks, predation pressure, and countless other factors. These fluctuations are natural and necessary for ecosystem health, but they can be dramatic enough to cause concern among park managers and visitors who prefer stability and predictability. The story of Yellowstone's animals reminds us that we are witnessing not just a collection of individual species, but a living community that has been shaped by the same geological and climatic forces that created the landscape itself. Each animal, from the smallest insect to the largest bison, carries within its genes and behaviors the memory of countless generations that survived volcanic eruptions, ice ages, and other dramatic environmental changes. In the gentle sounds of this wild kingdom, the howl of wolves, the bugle of elk, the splash of otters, we can hear the ongoing story of life's remarkable ability to adapt, persist, and flourish even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. These animals are not just inhabitants of Yellowstone. They are active participants in the ongoing creation of one of Earth's most remarkable ecosystems. In the peaceful quiet of this moment, let's turn our attention to Yellowstone's most famous and mysterious features, the geysers and hot springs that reveal the living heart of our planet. As you settle more deeply into relaxation, imagine standing beside Old Faithful on a cold winter morning, watching steam rise into the crystalline air as this ancient spring prepares for another eruption. The geothermal features of Yellowstone represent one of the most spectacular expressions of our planet's internal heat anywhere on Earth. More than 10,000 hydrothermal features bubble, steam, and erupt throughout the park, creating a landscape that seems almost otherworldly in its beauty and power. These features exist because of the unique combination of heat, water, and geology that makes Yellowstone unlike anywhere else on our planet. To understand how geysers and hot springs work, we need to journey once again into the depths beneath Yellowstone. Remember that enormous magma chamber we discussed earlier, the one that fed the great eruptions that shaped the caldera? That chamber is still there, still hot, still slowly cooling, but retaining enough heat to influence everything that happens at the surface. The heat from this magma chamber, located roughly 3 to 6 miles beneath the surface, creates a complex system of underground plumbing that extends throughout the Yellowstone region. Groundwater, rain and snowmelt that has seeped into the earth, descends through cracks and fissures in the rock, until it encounters this deep heat source. Picture this underground journey of a single drop of water. It begins as snowflake, perhaps falling on a high peak during a winter storm. Come spring, it melts and begins to seep into the ground, following tiny cracks and fissures through layers of volcanic rock. This descent can take decades or even centuries, as the water slowly works its way deeper and deeper into the earth. As our drop of water descends, the temperature gradually increases. At depths of just a few thousand feet, the temperature may reach 200 degrees Fahrenheit or more, well above the boiling point at sea level. But deep underground, the immense pressure from the overlying rock prevents the water from boiling. Instead, it becomes superheated, carrying enormous amounts of thermal energy. This superheated water doesn't remain in one place. Driven by convection currents and pressure differences, it begins to move through the underground maze of fractures and cavities, carrying heat from the deep sources toward the surface. Some of this water may travel horizontally for miles before finding a path upward. When superheated water finally does find a path to the surface, the results can be spectacular. As the water rises and pressure decreases, it finally reaches its boiling point. The sudden transformation from liquid to steam creates the explosive force that drives geyser eruptions and feeds the gentler flow of hot springs. But not all hydrothermal features behave the same way. The specific characteristics of each hot spring or geyser depend on the unique underground plumbing system that feeds it. Some features have simple, direct connections to heat sources and produce steady flows of hot water. Others have complex systems of chambers and constrictions that create the periodic eruptions characteristic of true geysers. Old Faithful, Yellowstone's most famous geyser, provides a perfect example of how these systems work. Deep beneath this celebrated feature lies a complex network of chambers and passages that fills with superheated water from below. The narrow constriction near the surface acts like a pressure cooker, preventing the water from boiling until conditions are just right. As the underground chambers fill with increasingly hot water, pressure builds throughout the system. Eventually, a small amount of water at the top of the column reaches its boiling point and flashes to steam. This creates a sudden decrease in pressure that triggers a chain reaction. More water boils, creating more steam, which reduces pressure further, causing even more violent boiling. The result is the spectacular eruption that draws millions of visitors to Yellowstone each year. Superheated water and steam shoot 130 to 180 feet into the air, creating a column of spray that can be seen for miles. The eruption continues until the underground chambers empty. Then the cycle begins again as the system slowly refills with hot water from below. What makes Old Faithful special is not just the height of its eruptions, but their predictability. While most geysers erupt on irregular schedules that can be influenced by earthquakes, seasonal changes, or shifts in underground water flow, Old Faithful maintains a relatively consistent pattern. Park rangers can predict its eruptions with remarkable accuracy, usually within plus or minus 10 minutes of the actual event. But Old Faithful is just one of more than 500 geysers in Yellowstone, making it home to roughly half of all the geysers on Earth. Each one is unique, with its own personality shaped by its particular underground plumbing system. Some, like Grand Geyser, produce towering eruptions that can reach 200 feet in height, but erupt only once or twice per day. Others, like Riverside Geyser, create graceful arcing displays that seem to defy gravity as they spray water across the Firehole River. The Upper Geyser Basin, where Old Faithful is located, contains the highest concentration of geysers in the world. Walking through this area is like strolling through a natural sculpture garden where each piece is created by the interaction of heat, water, and time. The boardwalks that protect both visitors and the fragile thermal features wind past dozens of active geysers, each with its own schedule and characteristics. Castle Geyser, with its massive cone built up over thousands of years of eruptions, demonstrates how geysers can actually create their own distinctive landscapes. The minerals dissolved in the hot water, primarily silica, precipitate out as the water cools, gradually building the intricate formations we see around many thermal features. Castle Geyser's cone, which resembles the ruins of an ancient fortress, is actually a living structure that continues to grow with each eruption. Hot springs, while perhaps less dramatic than geysers, are equally fascinating and far more numerous. Yellowstone contains thousands of hot springs, ranging from small seeps that barely warm the surrounding ground to massive pools like Grand Prismatic Spring, which is larger than a football field and discharges more than 500 gallons of hot water per minute. Grand Prismatic Spring represents one of Yellowstone's most photographed and scientifically important features. Its brilliant colors, from deep blue in the center through green, yellow, orange, and red at the edges, are created by thermophilic bacteria and archaea that thrive in different temperature zones around the spring. These microorganisms, some of which can survive in water approaching the boiling point, create living rainbows that change with the seasons and water temperatures. The center of Grand Prismatics reaches temperatures of around 189 degrees Fahrenheit, too hot for most life forms. Here, the water appears deep blue due to the selective absorption and scattering of light by the hot water itself, the same phenomenon that makes deep ocean water appear blue. As the water flows outward from the center and begins to cool, different species of heat-loving bacteria can survive, each adding its own characteristic color to the spectrum. These thermophilic microorganisms represent some of the most ancient forms of life on Earth. They evolved in the early stages of our planet's history, when surface conditions were much hotter and more chemically extreme than they are today. Studying these organisms in places like Yellowstone provides insights into how life might have originated on Earth and how it might exist on other planets with extreme environments. The discovery of thermophilic bacteria in Yellowstone's hot springs has had profound implications for biotechnology and medicine. Enzymes extracted from these heat-loving organisms are used in DNA amplification techniques that form the basis of modern genetic research. The Taq polymerase enzyme, originally isolated from bacteria living in Yellowstone's hot springs, is now used in laboratories around the world for everything from medical diagnostics to forensic investigations. Mammoth Hot Springs, located in the northern part of Yellowstone, demonstrates yet another way that geothermal features can shape the landscape. Unlike the silica deposits that characterize most of Yellowstone's thermal features, Mammoth is built from calcium carbonate, limestone dissolved from underground rock formations and redeposited. As the hot water cools and releases carbon dioxide, the terraces at Mammoth Hot Springs are constantly changing, growing, and evolving as hot water continues to flow over their surfaces. New terraces form as mineral-rich water finds new pathways to the surface, while older formations may dry up and become inactive when underground flow patterns shift. This dynamic quality gives Mammoth Hot Springs an almost organic appearance, as if the formations were living, breathing entities. The colors at Mammoth are created by the same types of thermophilic organisms found at other thermal features, but the different mineral composition creates different habitats and supports different communities of microorganisms. The result is a palette of colors that ranges from brilliant white, freshly deposited limestone to deep oranges and browns, where bacteria and algae have colonized older surfaces. Norris Geyser Basin represents Yellowstone's hottest and most dynamic thermal area. Water temperatures here can exceed 250 degrees Fahrenheit, and the chemistry is more acidic than in other parts of the park. These extreme conditions create a unique ecosystem where only the most specialized organisms can survive. The landscape at Norris is constantly changing, as underground heat sources shift and new thermal features appear while others become dormant. Steamboat Geyser, the world's tallest active geyser, is located here. Its eruptions, which can reach 300 to 400 feet in height, are spectacular but unpredictable, sometimes occurring several times in a month and sometimes remaining quiet for years at a time. The unpredictable nature of Steamboat Geyser illustrates one of the most fascinating aspects of Yellowstone's geothermal features. They are all connected to the same deep heat source, and changes in one area can influence features miles away. Earthquakes, seasonal variations in groundwater flow, and even human activities can alter the delicate balance that controls geyser and hot spring behavior. Scientists have observed that major earthquakes can trigger changes in geyser activity throughout Yellowstone. The 1959 Hebgen Lake earthquake, centered just outside the park, caused dramatic changes in thermal feature behavior that persisted for years afterward. Some geysers that had been dormant for decades suddenly became active, while others changed their eruption patterns or stopped erupting entirely. These connections between geothermal features and seismic activity provide important insights into the structure of Yellowstone's underground plumbing system. They also remind us that the thermal features we see today are not permanent fixtures, but rather dynamic expressions of ongoing geological processes. The seasonal rhythms of Yellowstone's geothermal features add another layer of complexity to their behavior. Winter snowpack affects the amount of groundwater entering the system, while spring snowmelt can temporarily cool some thermal features or alter their flow patterns. These seasonal variations are subtle but measurable, and they demonstrate the intimate connections between surface climate and underground processes. Climate change may be influencing Yellowstone's geothermal features in ways that scientists are just beginning to understand. Changes in precipitation patterns, snowpack depth, and timing of snowmelt could all potentially affect the behavior of geysers and hot springs. Long-term monitoring programs are tracking these changes, but the timescales involved make it difficult to separate natural variations from climate-induced trends. The thermal features of Yellowstone also play crucial ecological roles beyond their obvious visual appeal. Many animals depend on these features for survival during harsh winter conditions. Bison often gather near hot springs during blizzards, taking advantage of the warm microclimates and snow-free ground around thermal features. Birds may roost near warm springs on cold nights, and some thermal pools never freeze, providing reliable water sources throughout the winter. The unique ecosystems that develop around thermal features support species found nowhere else on Earth. These communities provide natural laboratories for studying evolution, adaptation, and the limits of life in extreme environments. Research conducted in Yellowstone's thermal features has contributed to our understanding of early life on Earth and continues to inform the search for life on other planets. As we consider the future of Yellowstone's geothermal features, we are reminded that these remarkable phenomena exist because of the delicate balance between heat, water, and geology that characterizes this unique landscape. The features we see today have been thousands of years in the making, and they will continue to evolve for thousands of years to come. The heart of Yellowstone beats strongest in these thermal features, where we can witness the direct expression of our planet's internal heat. In the gentle rhythm of bubbling hot springs and the dramatic punctuation of geyser eruptions, we can hear the pulse of geological time, slow by human standards, but constant and persistent over the eons. Each bubble of steam rising from a hot spring, each eruption of a geyser, represents a small release of energy that originated deep within the Earth millions of years ago. This energy has traveled through nearly 2,000 miles of solid rock to reach the surface, where it creates these spectacular displays before dissipating into the atmosphere. In the quiet contemplation of these thermal wonders, we are reminded of our planet's incredible complexity and the deep connections between processes occurring at vastly different scales of space and time. The geysers and hot springs of Yellowstone are not just beautiful natural phenomena. They are windows into the workings of our living planet, expressions of forces that connect the deepest interior of the Earth to its surface and atmosphere. As steam rises into the clear mountain air and hot water flows over mineral-encrusted terraces, we witness poetry written in stone and water, a testament to the creative power of geological forces and the endless capacity of our planet to surprise and inspire us with its beauty. And so our gentle journey through deep time comes to its peaceful conclusion. We have traveled together through 4 billion years of Earth history, witnessed the birth of continents and the fury of supervolcanoes, walked alongside ancient people and magnificent animals, and marveled at the ongoing expressions of our planet's living heart. As you rest in this quiet moment, let the profound story of Yellowstone settle gently into your consciousness like snow falling softly on a winter meadow. What we have discovered together is far more than just the natural history of a remarkable place. We have explored the very essence of what it means to be part of a living planet, a world where nothing is permanent, yet everything is connected, where destruction and creation dance together in an eternal cycle, where life persists and flourishes even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. The Yellowstone we have visited tonight exists simultaneously in many different time frames. In human time, it is a place of wonder and recreation, a sanctuary where we can reconnect with the natural world and find respite from the complexities of modern life. In ecological time, it is a dynamic ecosystem where countless species interact in intricate webs of relationship that have been evolving for thousands of years. In geological time, it is a brief expression of planetary forces that operate on scales almost beyond human comprehension. Each of these time frames teaches us something important about our place in the larger story of Earth and life. The human time frame reminds us of our responsibility as stewards of this remarkable heritage, temporary guardians of landscapes and ecosystems that will persist long after our individual lives have ended. The ecological time frame teaches us about the resilience and creativity of life, showing us how communities of living beings can adapt, recover, and flourish even after devastating disruptions. The geological time frame offers perspective on the grandeur and patience of planetary processes, reminding us that we are part of something much larger and more enduring than our daily concerns. In the story of Yellowstone, we see reflected the fundamental principles that govern all life on Earth. We see that change is the only constant, that systems which appear stable are actually dynamic and evolving, and that the most seemingly solid foundations of our world are themselves products of ongoing processes of creation and transformation. The ancient seas that once covered this region remind us that our planet has always been in flux, that the landscapes we consider permanent are actually temporary expressions of forces that continue to operate today. The great volcanic eruptions that shaped Yellowstone's calderas teach us about the awesome power of natural forces and the importance of thinking beyond human timescales when we try to understand our world. The patient recovery of life after each catastrophic eruption shows us something profound about the nature of existence itself. Life is not fragile in the way we sometimes think. It is remarkably resilient, creative, and persistent. Given time, life finds ways to colonize even the most unlikely environments, to create beauty and complexity from the simplest beginnings, and to build rich communities of interdependent organisms that transform landscapes and create new possibilities for future generations. The long history of human presence in Yellowstone reminds us that we have always been part of nature, not separate from it. The indigenous peoples who lived in this landscape for thousands of years developed ways of life that were deeply integrated with natural systems, demonstrating that human culture and natural ecosystems can enhance rather than degrade each other when guided by appropriate values and practices. The animals of Yellowstone teach us about the importance of wildness, not just as a quality of certain places, but as a fundamental aspect of life itself. In their seasonal migrations, their complex social behaviors, and their intricate relationships with plants and landscapes, we see expressions of intelligence and creativity that remind us that consciousness and awareness take many forms in the natural world. The geothermal features that make Yellowstone unique offer perhaps the most profound teaching of all. In the hot springs and geysers, we witness direct expressions of our planet's internal heat. Energy that originated in the formation of Earth itself has traveled through thousands of miles of solid rock over millions of years, and now emerges at the surface as steam and bubbling water. This is poetry written in the language of physics and chemistry, a reminder that even the most scientific descriptions of natural phenomena cannot fully capture their wonder and mystery. As you prepare to return from this journey through deep time, carry with you the perspective that comes from seeing the world through geological eyes. When you encounter challenges in your daily life, remember the patience of the plants that slowly colonized volcanic ash fields, building soil grain by grain over thousands of years. When you feel overwhelmed by the pace of change in the modern world, remember the deep stability of the processes that have been shaping our planet for billions of years. The Yellowstone hotspot that created the landscape we explored tonight will continue its work long after human civilization has become part of the geological record. The magma chamber beneath the caldera will slowly cool and crystallize. New volcanic features will form elsewhere as the North American continent continues its slow drift over the hot spot, and life will continue to adapt and evolve in response to changing conditions. But the deeper lesson of Yellowstone's story is not about the future. It is about the eternal present moment in which all change occurs. Every geyser eruption, every animal migration, every seasonal cycle of growth and dormancy is happening now, in the same eternal present moment that contains your breathing, your heartbeat, and your awareness of this story. In recognizing our participation in the ongoing story of Earth and life, we find both humility and empowerment. Humility, because we realize how small we are, vast scales of geological time and cosmic space. Empowerment, because we understand that we are active participants in the continuing creation of the world, and that our choices and actions matter in the larger story of which we are part. The hot heart of America that beats in Yellowstone is the same heart that beats in every living being. The same creative force that built mountains and carved canyons, the same intelligence that guides the migrations of animals and the cycles of seasons. It is the heart of the universe itself, expressing itself through countless forms and phenomena, including your own consciousness and awareness. As you drift toward sleep tonight, let the rhythm of that universal heartbeat carry you gently into dreams. Let the vastness of geological time expand your sense of what is possible, and let the resilience of life in all its forms inspire confidence in your own ability to adapt, grow, and flourish whatever changes may come. In the quiet spaces between your heartbeats, in the pause between breathing in and breathing out, you can feel the same deep pulse that drives the geysers of Yellowstone, the same patient rhythm that has been shaping our world for billions of years and will continue long after the mountains have worn away and new landscapes have taken their place. Sleep peacefully, knowing that you are held by forces larger and more enduring than any temporary troubles, supported by the same earth that cradles Yellowstone's calderas, warmed by the same sun that melts winter snows and drives the water cycle that feeds the park's rivers and thermal features. In your dreams tonight, perhaps you will find yourself walking once again through those misty meadows and ancient forests, listening to the songs of wolves and the whisper of wind through mountain peaks, feeling yourself to be exactly where you belong, part of the vast, ongoing story of Earth and life, a temporary but precious expression of the universe's endless creativity and love. The heart of Yellowstone beats on, and in its rhythm we hear the music of deep time, the song of a living planet, and the gentle lullaby that carries us all safely through the night. Good night.